And I am joined today by Jack Knowlton of the Unwritten Rule of Missouri podcast. How you doing today, Jack?
I'm good. I'm good, Owen. Happy to be on here. I know, anyone who knows me that might be watching your show knows I have some Alabama connections from a year ago, and this game was fun for me last year, having gone to Mizzou and covered Alabama, and now kind of have the flip of that and just watching it from afar. So I'm excited to talk Mizzou Bama. It should be fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so for those of you that are unaware, I mentioned up at the top of the show, in the intro that this is a Believe podcast collab. The guys at the Unwritten Rule are a part of the Believe network, am I myself. What Jack was referencing is last season he was covering with Bama Central, some Alabama stuff. So you may have seen his name floating around with Katie Wyndham and Tony Sakalas and all the guys over there. So, really excited to have him on to talk about this Missouri Tigers team that is 5-0. This is a Missouri team that I think the thing that jumps off the page that I'm sure a lot of people have heard is how insane this Mizzou rushing attack is. As of right now, it says at number one in the country. Obviously, if you can, I want you to have the Homer glasses on, but be able to semi take them off. Like, do you think this is a facet of who you've played, given the fact that Kansas and UMass are on your schedule, or do you think this is a facet of among Hardy and Jamal Roberts are just that elite this season?
I think it's a little bit of both, not to completely sit on the fence with that. But, I look at like that South Carolina game in particular. Obviously, that team has kind of underperformed, I think, everyone's expectations, but they still have a pretty vaunted defensive front. And the other thing was coming into this year for Mizzou, the offensive line was not necessarily a guarantee. They lost Armand Membu, who was a first round pick. They lost Marcus Bryant, who was a late round draft pick. Got a couple of guys back, but had some turnover there, and so we weren't really sure how good that was going to be. And they brought in Hardy. Everyone in Mizzou circles was kind of expecting, I think, Hardy to be solid. I don't think anyone was expecting this, and with what he's done, I think it's grown. To me, it's kind of grown past a level of competition. I think he is just one of, if not the best running back in the country, at least so far this season. And so I lean more toward I think Hardy is the real deal, regardless of who Missouri plays. I think he is a real threat. And I think the damage he's done, again, it is going to be interesting how much he can sustain it against Alabama and then the teams after that Mizzou has to play. To have some good defensive lines as well. But I think he's a pretty legit presence there, and it's grown above and beyond, I think, what anyone at Missouri would have thought, having brought him in, despite the really good year that he had at UL Monroe as a true freshman.
Yeah, and I think with the thing with Amon Hardy that you have to realize, and I know Kalen DeBoer mentioned this in his press conference, or maybe in Kane Womack as well, that a huge percentage of his yards have been after contact. Statistically, he breaks a tackle on every other carry. So it's a situation where he definitely is an elite running back. I think the part that really calls into question when you see how elite Mizzou has been running the football, I think that they've been so elite running the football. I'm curious if that has made Bo Prabula look a little better than he maybe is. And the reason I think of something like that is, for example, like I listen to some guys called the Solid Verbal. One of their co-hosts, Ty, is a Penn State grad, and he often will talk about when Bo was there. And elite quarterback isn't the first word that comes to his mind. Now, I'm not saying a change of scenery doesn't help, because of course there's plenty of instances where that's the case. But I'm curious what Bo Prabula potentially would look like if forced to throw the ball, 30 times. And I think that's what, the game plan to some extent would have to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very interesting. This is by far the best secondary that he's going to play, right? Alabama's got some studs I know back there, Zabian Brown, Damani Jackson. I assume those two have continued to kind of carry what they did last year. Keon Sabb is a guy I remember from my time covering them that I really liked. Bray Hubbard, those guys fly around. Kane Womack is what he is as a DC. So, yeah, Bo Prabula, this is a game where he is definitely going to have to make plays with his arm, and that has been a big question for Missouri. Is he has not been forced into that kind of situation yet because of how good the running game has been. But yeah, I think anyone will tell you, that's not going to last, whether it's against Alabama or some of these other teams down the line. These defenses are going to make him have to make plays with his arm, and yeah, that's probably the biggest question. He has made some really nice throws this year. I think he's done a lot of really smart things in some situational instances, against Kansas and South Carolina. Those games were in jeopardy for a little bit, and I think he made some really smart reads and has the intelligence to do it. But yeah, it's going to be another level. I think that he'll have to take it to against that Alabama secondary that's going to throw more looks at him, and certainly has a lot more talent than what he's seen and thrown against defensively. So it will be interesting. I will throw the other thing out too with Bo. I think the thing that has impressed me the most with him as a thrower is how he has really shared the wealth among these Mizzou wide receivers. A lot of people were really worried. They got Kevin Coleman Jr. in the portal, who was a proven kind of SEC commodity. He's from St. Louis. It was a homecoming for him. I think people thought that was going to hit and be okay, but they lost Luther Burden and Theo Weiss Jr. from last year. People were pretty skeptical about how that was gonna be replaced, and so far, it's been kind of a different guy every game. They have Coleman, who is kind of the go-to, but they have Marquise Johnson, who's a wild card. They have a really good tight end in Brett Norfleet. So the options for Bo Perbula, I do think, are more than what we thought coming into the year, which should help him in some of those situations against some of these really good secondaries. But he is going to have to make throws in the end. He starts with the ball, so it remains to be seen a little bit.
Absolutely. And of those guys, are I think the thing that obviously I know that the quarterback position has changed since last season, and I don't want to harp too much on last season, just because when you look at transfer portal situations, Missouri has completely overhauled their top two guys, their top running back and quarterback both were not on the team last season. But I think you have to still draw from the fact that this coaching staff, Kalen DeBoer's first time facing Eli Drinkwitz on the field, at least, was last season, and you saw a guy in your offensive coordinator that Kalen DeBoer knows fairly well, right? Like him and Ryan Grubb both, obviously, he coached for him at Fresno State. Like, does it give you any concern that it is a bit of a disciple situation? So he knows a little bit more of not only the person, maybe less of the personnel, but a lot more of what the coaching kind of philosophy is of the person that's doing it. Not to say it's a Saban disciple type situation, but when you see somebody where it's a, descendant, you're always a little bit more, eyes or ears perked on what's going to happen in those situations.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. Honestly, the other one I go to too is on the defensive side with Corey Batoon, Mizzou's DC, having worked for Kane Womack at South Alabama, and how that plays into it. I was thinking about that, kind of last year when these two teams met up, and that game is so hard to dissect for me too, because of course Brady Cook was injured. They were going with a Drew Pine and a road Alabama situation. It was never really gonna work, and it didn't. But yeah, I mean, I think with Grubb coming in, it is pretty clear for Alabama that has worked, and that has seemed to affected their chemistry in a really positive way. I also think, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but it seems like Ty Simpson is a much better fit for what DeBoer wants to do than Jalen Milroe was. That was such a big kind of mantra last year. I didn't think Jalen Milroe was a bad player. I don't know if he was a Kalen DeBoer kind of quarterback. And I feel it feels like Ty Simpson is, and he's gained a lot of confidence. So yeah, I think what makes me kind of nervous from the Mizzou standpoint is that piece that it seems like Grubb being there has unleashed DeBoer's creativity a little bit. I know there's all the even you go into the Caden Proctor, what is it, the crispy package? Did I see it was called for him on offense, something like that?
Yeah.
I think that piece scares me, and then how they've responded from that Florida State game in terms of they have seemed to have found a little bit of a chip, a little bit of a swagger that that didn't seem to exist much last year, and certainly for that Florida State game, and that is gonna travel. When you talk about this being a road game for Alabama. So I think it could be interesting. And then I think the defensive kind of connections there with Batoon and Womack, who do, I think, similar stuff with blitz packages and stuff, it is interesting to me as well.
Yeah, and while we're kind of on the subject of defense, I think that's the part where I'm most kind of curious about, because Missouri, for all of their credit and what they've been able to do against South Carolina and Kansas and all these teams, like this is clearly going to be the best receiving core quarterback duo that they're going to have faced this entire season, right? Like it's realistically, even as an Alabama fan, this is probably going to be the best receiving quarterback duo that anyone is going to face this entire season. Um, does this give you any concern, right? Because what I've seen out of Missouri, I really like what I'm seeing out of the defensive line and linebackers from like a run stuffing perspective. I just don't feel like they've been tested down the field or in the passing game quite as much by some of the other guys this season.
Yeah, so does the secondary give me concern? Yes, it does. That is the biggest thing for me in this game. I think it is. You can talk about all the nuances you want and go deep on a lot of this stuff. I think it is really going to come down to a matchups piece. I do not have very much confidence in this Mizzou defensive back room. Toriano Pride and Drayden Norwood are their kind of two main guys at cornerback. That's whose names you guys are going to hear when you watch this game, guarding the likes of Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard and Isaiah Horton. And I don't expect those two to stack up well against them. And with the way Ty Simpson seems to be throwing the football, I think that's a matchup Alabama is pretty heavily favored in and should win. And frankly, when I think about it from a prediction standpoint, we'll probably win them the game on the road. I think the way they can unleash those guys. And you're right, there is no receiving core that has stacked up to what they're going to face on Saturday versus what Missouri's faced so far. I don't know. I think you're right. I don't know a better receiving core off the top of my head in the conference in terms of kind of its overall depth and explosive talent. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my guy Latsier Brooks as well. I covered him very heavily as a recruit. I smile every time he gets a catch and does something because he was a fun player to watch his tape of in high school. So I know there's a lot of weapons on this Alabama team. I don't think Missouri matches up very well. This team is very hot or cold in that it feels like they are stopping a play for a 2-yard loss or giving up like a 60-yard touchdown at times. And there is sometimes no in between. Lenore Sellers is a very talented quarterback, dotted them up with, in my opinion, not a very good South Carolina receiving core. I'm not very high on Nick Harbor. I don't think anyone else after him is all that good. And so I think Ty Simpson can come out and execute a very similar game plan. So yeah, that is the biggest worry for me of this game is how that secondary is going to stack up, because there's a lot of very scary, very fun players to watch, but very scary players to watch out wide for Alabama.
Yeah, and I think part of the thing also that you know that I think potentially, and again, I know it's very difficult with football, but I feel like the defense has a few more returning pieces than the offense from last season. When I look at what Alabama was able to do in the running game, even last season, and Alabama's running game this season, I will admit has not been great, and it's been widely talked about. The first running game that we actually did anything well was the Vanderbilt game, where we really controlled the tempo and controlled the pace of that game with a huge game out of Jam Miller. But last season, it really felt like we had multiple guys that were able to, get some decent yards on the ground. Obviously, it's a different running back room because you saw Justice Haynes and Richard Young as kind of your two, funny enough, your biggest yard, carriers on the ground last season in this game. But I am curious to see, I think that that's something that also, in my mind, if you're going to turn this into a Missouri front, like it, the defense is the part that, like I said, I think it just scares me the most from a Missouri standpoint. I will admit this is, and anybody that's watched this show knows, I had Missouri circled as kind of this game concerns me from the time I saw it on the schedule. There was something about it. I didn't love it being after a Georgia and Vanderbilt and in between a Tennessee, right? You're sandwiched in between two losses from last season. It's a game that you won 34-0 last season. It's on the road and it's 11 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that just spells you better play to your potential or it could be ugly, right? Like it sounds bad, but it really had nothing to do with the players on the field. It had more to do with the circumstance of the game. But I am very curious to, in this one, because even the way you're saying it, it feels like if the game goes how most people may expect, like Alabama should win this game. But I think Missouri has a game plan in which if Alabama is not able to stop the run, right, Missouri absolutely could pull a Vanderbilt from last season and just hold the ball the entire game, right? I mean, Missouri could hold the ball for 40 minutes and it would not shock either of us.
No, not at all. I actually think, that was one thing, if you go back and watch that Kansas game, that they did really, really well was, they were down, it was 22-7 or 22-6 or whatever, and they get the safety, they stripped, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name. Kansas QB, and
Jalen Daniels.
Jalen Daniels. I had Jaden Daniels in my head, and I'm like, I know that's not right. This brain fart, but they get the strip. It goes for a safety, and then they went on, a super long drive. They had a 99-yard drive in that game. They have, I think, more 99-yard touchdown drives than anyone in the country so far. It's like 3 or 4, and so that is where I will circle back and to put on my Mizzou glasses a little bit more. I was curious about this with the run game, and you kind of touched on it for Alabama. But you're right. I think Mizzou there is a world where they control the tempo and they stop those Alabama explosive players by just keeping them off the field, just running the ball, controlling the time of possession, really taking a page out of what Vanderbilt did to this Alabama team last year. I'm not super confident that that's going to happen because, of course, Alabama has plenty of weapons on defense that can slow down Mizzou as well. But I am curious. To me, it sometimes it feels a little bit like Alabama could still be really one-dimensional, pass heavy, and win the game. But Missouri has not let anyone run the ball on them this season. And now, I don't know in terms of Alabama's rushing attack, how much better it is than South Carolina's and Kansas's. They didn't have much going for them at the running back position. But, if you can completely shut off their water on the ground, in theory, that does make it easier to start, defending them through the air if they can't run the football. And that is something Missouri has done to people this year. And in turn, it lets them get the football back. It lets them grind games into the ground and keep that opposing offense off the field. I do think that'll be one of Missouri's best strategies. But I'm curious how you think that Alabama run game will stack up to a defensive front that has been scary for Mizzou this year.
It's really tough to say because when I look at it, at the end of the day, I think that Jam Miller is kind of the X factor that's really hard to tell, right? He's had one elite game against Vanderbilt and one okay game against Georgia, but those were his first 2 games back, right? I do think that what you're seeing out of the rest of the running back room is fine. I don't think that there's any issue with it. But I do think that there's a reason why everyone was so happy to get Jam Miller back, and it wasn't just a pass blocking, even though that is a huge piece of his game. I think that this is really going to come down to, is this a situation where Alabama is able to do it? Because I think the reason why Alabama would try to do it is not as much from a establishing the run. It's more of a time of possession thing, right? Like when you look at the Vanderbilt game this season compared to last season, the difference in the games, obviously Alabama was able to get off the field a few more times compared to what they were last season, but Alabama was able to establish the run enough that we held the time of possession battle, right? We almost doubled up Vanderbilt. And so if Alabama is going to be able to keep Missouri off the field any length of time, I feel like you're going to either have to establish the run, or if Missouri's shutting that down, you're going to have to do some of the, offshoots of the run game with your tunnel screens and your stuff, like getting guys out in space, which I do think Ryan Grubb has done a really good job of this season, right? Like, because early in those games, you saw like Wisconsin and some others where Alabama was not being able to run the football. And that was because they were running back by committee and a lot of other reasons. But you saw Jeremy Bernard in the backfield where you're just doing unique things with guys like that to be able to get your playmakers ball in space and try to get an athlete on a defensive back, right? Because at the end of the day, that's the goal, whether you're running the football or not.
Right.
And I think that's potentially what you may see if Missouri is able to shut down the run. I think the running game is really still an open question for me. I think this Missouri game will tell me, is it a okay run game that, has struggled at times, or is it a, good enough run game? Because I do think that with Ty Simpson and how well he's been dealing at quarterback, you don't need an elite run game. You just need a serviceable run game so that everyone isn't sending the house on every play, right? Like this is a situation where I think that has more of the difference in this game. I think the other question that I would have is, when you're talking about the defensive line, I know that from a sacks perspective, y'all don't have a ton of sacks, but y'all do have one guy in Damon Wilson that has 3.5 sacks, some other guys with 2 sacks. Like, what does the pass rush look like? Because I will say the one place where now, and this is a situation where Ty has either looked really good at times or not as great at times. Against Florida State, he just held on the ball entirely too long. Against Vanderbilt, it felt like he was just trying to make a few too many plays with his legs. It wasn't really holding on to the football. It was more of he was trying to be a playmaker and should have just thrown it away and survived to the next down. But what does your pass rush look like? Because that's a place where it could be an X factor, especially on the road.
I agree with that. I think it's an X factor for Missouri too, because of what you just said, where, I think the reason some of the sack numbers aren't as high, is partially because they faced two QBs in Daniels and Sellers, who I think are a lot better architects on the run and can escape a little bit better and can do some things with their legs maybe a little bit better than Simpson has shown so far in an albeit limited sample size. And Missouri have been the kings to me of Damon Wilson. At a certain point, had more QB pressures than I think he had tackles. I know the stat going around is that he obviously transferred from Georgia. I believe he has more quarterback pressures than the entire Georgia defensive front combined this year, which that's been a fun stat to read if you're a Mizzou fan, not obviously as a Georgia fan, but. I do wonder if it is a pass rush that has been able to get home. Damon Wilson is a good edge rusher. They have Zion Young, who was one of their best returners from last year, had a couple of sacks, had a notable. He was the one who had the scoop and score against Oklahoma that walked it off for Missouri with like 30 seconds left. So they have those two guys on the edge. They have Darius Smith, who is another Georgia transfer, who they also had last year, was out for the season with an injury. He's gotten a little bit more involved. And then the guy to know, and this goes back to what you said about kind of some of the outside tunnel screen stuff that Alabama might try to mix in to have some balance, is Josiah Trotter, who they brought over from West Virginia. He has been the team's best defender. He is a tackle machine. He gets into the backfield on runs a lot, and he is kind of that second level guy that I think his ability to fly out to some of those quick throws and tackle receivers and get them on the turf is going to be a big X factor. Up front, their best defensive tackle is a guy named Chris McClellan. He was a Florida transfer, was also at Mizzou last year. But this is a pass rush that has got home. I think they've gotten less sacks than, less sacks on paper, because I think they've dealt with some quarterbacks that frankly have been good at escaping and making some plays happen. But if they can win the battle with Alabama's offensive line, I think they will be able to put pressure on Simpson. I do think they have the guys to do it, and that factor will be big in deciding if Missouri can win that game.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Alabama fans should kind of keep an eye on early in this game, because we've seen kind of the hot and cold of that with Ty Simpson. You saw the Vandy game where he was just, and again, it wasn't he was playing poorly. By no stretch did Ty have a poor game. He just was trying to do a little too much and should have just like taken the L and just thrown it out of bounds, thrown it away. Versus when you saw in that Georgia game, he was perfectly on time. And I know Brooks Austin did a really good job breaking down the film after that one. And he, all the Georgia fans were in his comments like, guys, we need a pass rush. We need a pass rush. And like, he was like, you need me a guy who can get to the quarterback in 1.7 seconds or whatever it was. He was like, Ty was doing a two-step and throw. Like, there's nobody in the country that can get to the quarterback in that amount of speed. I don't care who it is. Like, it's just not going to happen when your quarterback's playing that well on time. There's not a whole lot you can do. And the reason I bring that one up is, again, that one was on the road, right? So it's Ty has had that really, really good road game from Georgia, but he's also had the poor road game from Florida State. I don't consider that one quite as bad because it was his first start, and I think that some people need to consider that. We think of Ty Simpson as the guy who's been in the system for a long time and been with the team for a long time, and those things are all true. But it still was his first road start, right? Like sometimes you have some growing pains in your first start. And I think that is something that Ty has gotten better at this season. I don't think that the Vanderbilt issues from a sacks perspective were the same issues that happened in that Florida State game. I think they were just completely different. While we're on the subject of sacks, upon looking at it, I'm just curious, like the number that y'all have with Bo Perbula is he's been sacked 12 times. Obviously we know the offensive line has done a pretty good job getting movement in the running game. I think that 12 sack number is much higher than I expected with how good you guys have been at running the football. Is that a piece that potentially, I don't want to say fully scares you, but like that's a number. South Carolina has a really good defense and they've got some really good defensive ends, but outside of that, I don't think that there's any defensive lines that y'all have played this season that made me think that 12 should be a number that y'all have given up this season.
Yeah, the offensive line has been a bit of a frustration point in the standpoint of So entering the season for Mizzou, they obviously, I think the name, if anyone, that people will know from Alabama on Mizzou's offensive line is Caden Green, who was a really good. He was transferred from Oklahoma. He was a good left tackle last year. Essentially, 2 weeks before the season, they decided to, or sorry, it was a really good left guard. And 2 weeks before the season, they decided to kick him out to tackle because they did not like the either of the two left tackles that they were working with there. It was really bad actually in their first game against Central Arkansas. The offensive line had some really, really shaky moments. Gave up a couple of sacks in that game. That was kind of frustrating, but it's actually, that 12 number, maybe it is just with how good the running game has been that sort of blinds you to that, but it has been actually better as the season has gone on. Caden Green's kind of adjusted to that left tackle role. Their other tackle, his name's Keegan Trost. He's good at right tackle. They brought in a guy from Michigan, Dominic Jadis, who's their right guard, who's solid. So, and then they have Connor Tollison, who's been their center for, I think it's his third year starting. He's been there for forever. So it's sort of stabilized a little bit. Now, again, this is where I think, when you say this is a really good test for Alabama's rushing game in terms of like what it is it a point of, oh, it's just okay. Oh, can it win you a game? Is it going to lose you games? I kind of look at that potentially as the same thing for Mizzou's offensive line. I think they held up really well against Dylan Stewart, which was a great first test for them. But I know Alabama, has a ton of stud linebackers, pass rushers too. LT Overton, what I remember about LT Overton was he was the missed sack monster last year, and I don't think he's missed as many of those sacks. So I know he's kind of a dangerous edge rusher. So yeah, I think that's one that can kind of go either way. But I do think the way this team has held up the run has helped them in turn in the passing game and trying to give Bo enough time. And I'll give Bo credit too. He's a good improviser. He likes to run the football. He is kind of like you mentioned that Ty does at times. He is not one to give up on a play. It's almost got him, decapitated a few times, which is not great because they already lost their backup. Mizzou did, but it's a mix of both. So if they lose that battle by a significant margin in the trenches from Alabama's defensive line, I think I will be pretty disappointed. But it is, the potential of that is certainly there because they had a first round pick at right tackle. They're just not as strong, but. Overall, I think it actually is a little bit better than those 12 sack numbers have shown.
Gotcha. And the thing you have to, I think, realize from an Alabama, defensive, pass rush perspective, it's a unit that has quite frankly not been great so far this season. I think that you're seeing some really promising stuff out of Yanze Pierre here recently, especially with the injury to Quay Rusall. I think that you're just, Jamarian Latham, obviously, got hurt and had to go to the ICU with a neck injury. So you're just playing some different guys than I think who you were originally expecting to play in some of those positions, as well as, I think getting Tim Keenan back and being able to have a solid force in the interior, not to say that he's getting to the quarterback, but just having him there, allowing a guy like James Smith, if you're playing two defensive tackles, to be able to get to the quarterback has been a big deal. I think that this is a situation where, and that's the reason I asked the question, is that's a situation where I think that battle may be one that's, kind of important to watch, because I think that both Alabama's pass rush and Missouri's offensive line are going to have some kind of open questions that both teams are very curious to see if they can have answered. The final place that I want to ask you about, and just because
don't be special teams,
it's going to be special teams.
Oh.
And right. I think both of us have some of those thoughts about our special teams, right? And it's, if we're going to do all three facets, when I see here, it looks like Robert Meyer is your main kicker. He's missed 2 extra points, however, and then he has missed just 1 field goal. Yes. But then you have another kicker that's 3 for 3 and 2 for 2, and it looks like he's your long range guy. He's got a big leg, 55-yard long.
Yeah. So I'll just say that's Blake Craig, and he was the full-time kicker. He is out for the season. So it is just Robert Meyer now.
So it's just Robert Meyer. Okay. Yep. And that's one where I wasn't 100% sure. So
yep.
Was the thought being Blake Craig was going to be the guy all season, and then he just got hurt, and now you're stuck with whoever the backup is?
Yeah. So Blake Craig had a pretty good year last year. He was a very strange loved to miss from the stat, I think I remember it. I believe he was like 9th or 7th in the country with the most made field goals. And he was like 1 for 5 or 1 for 6 between 41 and 49 yards. But he was great from 50 plus. He was automatic from the close range. He had a very weird year, and everyone was comfortable with him. He was going to be fine. I think take even more of a jump. I think he was a redshirt sophomore last year, and he was a good kicker. Yes, he got hurt on a kickoff. He is out for the season. So their kicker now is a true freshman named Robert Meyer, who he has missed 2 extra points. He stepped up a ton in the South Carolina game. He had the 3 made field goals. He made 1, 2 to make it a 2-score game that essentially iced the game, which has been very impressive. But everyone is sort of treading on very thin ice with him. And it's not his fault. He's a true freshman being thrown into an SEC kicking job that he was not supposed to have coming into the season. So kicker is scary is my most professional summation of that.
And how's your punter? Is he just serviceable or fine?
He's been okay. His name's Connor Wesselman. He was the backup punter at Stanford last year, which apparently, if you're the backup punter at Stanford, that rewards you with an SEC punting job. I speak for my 2 colleagues at the Unwritten Rule. We have a long-standing bit and beef with Missouri special teams coach Eric Link. He has made some just gobsmacking decisions in his tenure there. Missouri actually had a rule changed for them after a special teams moment once in a game against Kentucky a few years ago. The other thing you are going to see is Missouri has been drop kicking kickoffs this year, which is something I did not even know you were allowed to do. They actually had a thing against Kansas where the refs, I believe, should have called them for a penalty for doing an illegal one. It's very weird. It's so they've been drop kicking kickoffs because Blake Craig was their normal kickoff guy. They have, I believe, Wesselman doing it now, if my memory serves. But it's a lot of weirdness. Punting has been better than I thought with Wesselman. And returning, they have Kevin Coleman Jr. on punt returns. That has been something that's been shaky for Mizzou. When they had Luther Burden forever, it was Luther Burden supposed to be this, God's gift as a punt returner, and he never was. It's been okay with Kevin Coleman. It's nothing special, but this is, if there's something that I felt, Missouri could lose a game because of special teams, like it's certainly, that's potential's always in the air with how many questions there are.
So what you're telling me is neither team wants this to turn into a special teams
No.
battle. If this turns into a return game, Alabama's very happy because you got Lodzier Brooks and these guys back there that have done a great job returning the ball, right? Like Alabama's return game has been pretty good. They haven't broken any, but I mean, fine, right?
Because you're not fumbling, you're not returning it to the 5-yard line on kickoffs. You're happy.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, they're making smart decisions when they're returning it and they're getting decent returns out of it. I'm happy with what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
The kicking game with Connor Talty has been very hit or miss. The Georgia game potentially was one of the worst kicks I've ever seen in my entire life.
I saw that. Whew.
He missed it by 30 yards left. It literally, the way I describe it is it looked like he was playing college football, the video game, and didn't know how to kick and didn't hit the button at
just
the right time.
Just like all of us, yeah.
I mean, it was one of the worst kicks I've ever seen.
So I'm sorry. I promise I won't keep interrupting. So that's not just a Saban thing. It's carried over. It sounds like it's just an Alabama kicker's curse thing. Is that a sore spot I'm hitting? Maybe?
It's a weird one though, right? Because for example, in the Vanderbilt game, you see him miss the first one, and it's clearly one where you just don't particularly love. But then he comes out and he hits 3 more, right? None of the 3 were particularly long. But, I mean, he did hit 3 big kicks, the third one being super important because it made it a 2-score game. When at a time, the defense was doing well, but you weren't 100% sure if you were going to have to, need that second score. So I was really happy with what I saw. It feels like for so long we were spoiled with Will Reichard, and you had a guy that when he trotted out there, unless it was, 50 plus, you didn't even consider him missing. I mean, you didn't even consider the possibility that there could be a miss. Like when he missed, you were appalled. And it's because he was so good, right? Like he was right down the middle every time. And Talty, for some of his credit, has been he was somebody who was a super highly rated recruit. He was somebody that I know Saban really liked, and he's going to be the successor to Will Reichard. And he's been okay. He just hasn't been as good as I think Alabama fans were hoping he would be. And I think it really says a lot for how much faith that Kalen DeBoer either has or doesn't have in him. I think Kalen DeBoer doesn't have. I think he has more faith in his offense, obviously with Ty having the ball in his hands, which is where you saw the first interception Ty threw last game, first interception of the season. But then it also feels like at times, Kalen DeBoer, he was asked about it in the press conference. It sounded like Kalen DeBoer at least semi-trusted Connor to go out there and be able to make a reasonable kick. I think that is a thing that if either one of these teams, if this came down to a special teams battle, I don't think either team's going to be super happy with it, because I think that both teams feel like they could lose it on special teams realistically if this comes down to a field goal kicking competition. But I feel like it's just one of those things that, yeah, I'm very curious to see, because it isn't quite as atrocious as I feel like it has been, but that Georgia kick still is just in the back of my mind because I'm just not going to unsee it because of how terrible it was.
Yeah, I would say too, on the Missouri side, if you can, don't be shocked if both teams march down the field and score touchdowns on their first possessions if the score is 7-6 Alabama.
Fun. So I guess I want to ask for your final thoughts. When I look at this game, I think that there's a lot of things that Missouri. I think that there is a path to victory for Missouri, and I think that path to victory is fairly simple. Missouri has to win the time of possession battle fairly substantially. I think that the best, as you said earlier, the best defense for Missouri is keeping Alabama's offense off the field, pulling the Vanderbilt from last season. I personally think that there also is going to have to be at least one turnover, and that's something that Alabama has done incredibly well for this season. They have just one turnover on offense. It was the pick early in the Vanderbilt game that Ty Simpson had last game. He has done a really good job taking care of the football. None of the running backs have put the ball on the ground. Like, that is a place where Alabama has been pretty successful. But I do think that for Missouri to have a ton of success in this game, I think that if you let Alabama's offense have the football and there's no turnovers in this game, I think that would immediately make me lean Alabama, just because I think that with enough chances, Ty Simpson on those defensive backs, personally, I'm going to give Ty Simpson and the wide receivers the edge. And I think that what scares me is, if I'm a Missouri fan, is I think that Alabama's defense has been susceptible to the run game. Absolutely. I think that Florida State was able to do some things, but I look at the Florida State game or the Vanderbilt game and what Kane Womack was able to adjust, right? I think the Florida State game, the team played on their heels. Alabama gave up a ton of rushing yards. And you saw in that Vanderbilt game a couple of broken runs, and immediately everyone assumed, oh, wow, this defense is terrible again with the run. And the stat that you kind of point to, and I know Nick Kelly tweeted it out, and I know some others did as well, is that in the first quarter of the Missouri game, in the Vandy game, Alabama gave up like 120 yards rushing. They gave up 22 yards the rest of the game. So clearly, and if you take it even further than that, they give up 65 yards on the touchdown and 36 yards on a run by Diego Pavia. So outside of that, they only gave up like 30 yards rushing the rest of the game. So this is a situation where I think that Alabama's adjustments in the running game is a big deal. But, what is your kind of overall, what do you think, we talked about kind of our biggest impact positions, but, out of all these things, what do you think the biggest thing is? And then what's kind of your score prediction, for the game?
Yeah, I think to me with the turnovers thing, it becomes less about really trying to force an Alabama turnover versus on the other side of that, Bo Prabula not making any mistakes when throwing the football. I would like to stand on the fact that if Ahmad Hardy's talent can just kind of trump adjustments, I think that can be really big for Missouri. And if it's just a world where, Ahmad Hardy's going to get his, you live with that if you're Alabama and try and stop everything else. I think then to me, the bigger thing comes down, I think I could see that potentially happening. And then it comes down to, well, can we bait Bo Prabula into making a mistake? Can we, bait him into holding on to the ball too long, throwing it to the wrong guy, making the wrong read? I think that's the biggest thing for me with Missouri's offense is, can he limit that? Can he make the right throws? Can he step up and deliver when he needs to? And then how well this offensive line blocks for both the pass and the run. And then, defensively, I think you nailed it. The best defense to me for Mizzou is offense, and particularly long offense, long sustained drives that keeps Alabama's weapons off the field, and then generating. Can you make Ty Simpson run around? Can you make him have more of those Georgia yips where he's thinking about it too much? Is he getting flushed out of the pocket and getting a little frustrated? Missouri's defense has shown, their pass rush has shown they can do that to quarterbacks. And again, they've proven they can win games without necessarily getting QBs on the ground. And just kind of making them hurry into errant throws. But yeah, I think you're right. I think ultimately I struggle to look past the amount of weapons that Alabama has. They're going to give him Ty enough time to find some of those guys, and I think that will ultimately win the game for Alabama. To me, it says a lot about how far Missouri has come, to where we had a discussion about, I think I saw the spread on FanDuel was like 3.5 Alabama or 4.5 Alabama. And I had thrown out, if Missouri covers, I think, you consider that a win as you go forward. They held Alabama within a score. And one of my other hosts was kind of like, well, I don't know. I think, with how far Missouri has come, you really want to win this game, and you don't want to necessarily be happy with a good loss. And I think that does say a lot with where Missouri thinks it is, in the realm of the SEC. Whatever you think of that, take, I guess, is what you think of it. But I do think I struggle to get all the way to a Mizzou win. I think it will be a good game. I think it should be a good game. I will say I'll be disappointed if it's a complete blowout. I don't think it'll be 34-0 again. I just don't think the circumstances are the same. So after that long-winded answer, I will go. I just see this is where I always struggle, because I need to look at an over-under and just divide by 2 and add or subtract. But I will go. Let's go for 31-27 Alabama in just a good fight in Columbia, Missouri. That'll be my final score.
Yeah, and a lot of what you said, I think, is 100% accurate. I think that the thing that I look at Missouri in this instance as being similar to Vanderbilt, and I don't mean that in the way that a lot of, that would have been thought of 20 years ago, of like Vanderbilt's terrible, right? Like, I mean that in the sense of Vandy and Missouri are not on the tier with Alabama and Ole Miss, but they're right below that tier, right? Like, they're a situation where things could absolutely, they could absolutely break their way and they could win this game. And I don't think that it would truly shock either one of us if Missouri won this game. But I think that if things happen the way we're expecting them to happen, or how they quote unquote should happen, I think that Alabama will win this game in the, I personally think it's going to be a little more than that. I'm thinking more of like 31-20. I think that Alabama will cover. I think that it will actually be a very close game for a long percentage of this one, just because of the running attack and how Missouri is going to be able to do that. But I do think that kind of long term, this is a situation where I think that Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb have done such a good job adjusting this season about, just on offense, or, even with Kane Womack and what they've been able to do from adjustments on defense. So like I said, I do think that Alabama is going to be able to win this one. But as I said earlier, and as I've said many times, this game does scare me. This is a game that I've had circled for quite a long time. And honestly, the 11 a.m. kick has as much to do with it as anything. And it's because I think when a football player walks into that 2:30, 6 o'clock kick, it's juiced, right? You've had people tailgating. You've heard the crowd. Like, people have got in there hours and hours and hours before the game. And so the whole time you're warming up, you can just feel the buzz. These 11 a.m. kicks they almost lull you into a sleep of, oh, the atmosphere isn't going to be that good. And I think, to Missouri's credit, I think that they have a lot to be proud of. At the end of the day, this team's 5-0, and it has done a really good job with who they face this season. I am curious to see if there's potentially anything, and one thing we didn't talk about was y'all just came off a bye. Is there anything to that, right? Like, there's things that where Missouri has had some extra things to work on, and potentially when you're coming off a bye, you could have something up your sleeve. So that is something when you're on the road that I think potentially could play into this game. But I'm going to stick with my gut. I'm going to go 31-20. I do think that it will be a very good game. I'm with you. I do not think this will be a blowout, but I do think that either team could win, and I don't think it would truly shock me.
Yeah, I'm glad I like these picks, because I'm glad I went a little bit more narrow, because if I put truly an objective lens on it, it will probably be closer to your score. But I like my 4-point win, and then we're all on pins and needles for 60 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, as a Bama fan, I would hate the close game. As a college football fan, I would love the close game, and
That's how
I
it
feel
always
the same.
goes.
I feel the same way about basketball or any other sport. It's like when your team's playing, you want them to win huge because then it's very comfortable and you don't have to worry about it. But as a college football fan, I completely would love the close game and hope that it does happen. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on the show. Please do me a favor and tell the fine people out there where they can find you guys and y'all's show.
Yeah, we're just the Unwritten Rule. Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you want to listen to us, we're on YouTube. Same channel name. Twitter is just at Believe Unwritten. You can give us a follow. We try and post some funny content on there in addition to just tweeting all of our shows. So, I appreciate you, Owen. Let's run this back for basketball. I'm excited too. I was in the Bama recruiting sphere for a year or two, and it's been fun seeing some of those freshmen get out there that I watched as recruits. How's London Simmons doing? I've seen he's played.
London Simmons is a name that you will want to watch out for.
Uh-oh.
He has. So it's been a situation where he hasn't had a lot of playing time more because, and so Kane Womack actually was asked about him this last game and was like, hey, London didn't play a whole lot. And it was a situation where Kane had to be like, well, we didn't have to take Tim Keenan off the field as much because our offense held onto the ball. So Tim didn't need as much rest. But in the plays that London did get, you heard his name called a lot.
Okay.
And that is something that we've seen out of London Simmons. He is one of the freshmen that has definitely stepped up on the defensive line. That is a position where Alabama has had some issues with multiple guys going out with injuries. And then, James Smith had a targeting penalty, which was questionable at best. But, with the injuries and such, London Simmons has definitely gotten some playing time. I think that you will see him, especially with how much Missouri is going to run the football and potentially hold on to the ball. I think you will see him in this game. He is somebody that I think I would just pay attention to because he definitely has made some substantial plays in his limited playing time. It's one of those guys that I think long term you really like what you see, but with the elite stacked room in front of him, it's James Smith and Tim Keenan kind of have that position on lock from a starting perspective.
There you go. Okay, that's what I figured, but that's great to hear. Yeah, he was a good kid, so I'm rooting for him.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jack, for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. As always, if you guys are interested, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and theirs. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you guys in the next episode. Peace.